touring coupe is kind of a contradiction. Originally, a touring car was a car with 2 or more rows of seating. More specifically, one with an open top. A phaeton being split between roadsters and touring cars. Touring cars specifically being the 4-seat version. But as closed cars became the common choice, terminology shifted. Touring cars would be the long-distance version of a passenger car. The cruiser, a car for touring or tourists. One would be inclined to say a highway car, but highways were not really much of a thing at the time. The alternative to the runabout, or what we would now refer to as a city car. Since then, various types of road racing cars have been called touring cars. Usually coupes, but not always. In fact, some early racing series define the difference between a sports car and a touring car as being functional doors. But a touring coupe is more than just a 2-door touring car. It's a sportier looking version of a touring car. Although not necessarily a sportier version, that would be a grand tourer. It was different from a business coupe in that it had a permanent rear seat like a sedan, although less roomy. As the business coupe fell from favor, the touring coupe became the sports coupe, which by the late 1940s just meant a hardtop coupe. But by the 1960s, the idea of a more stylish 2-door version of an existing car came back around. In the beginning, these were little more than factory dress-up kits. Cars like the Buick Wildcat and the Oldsmobile Starfire. And it kind of created some confusing overlap with personal coupes. Did people cross-shop the $3,800 Wildcat and the $4,300 Riviera? Maybe. Which did the Chrysler 300 fall under, if either? The Pontiac Grand Prix would become the car that would effectively define the segment. Different from other standard Pontiacs and more than just trim, a bit smaller, lighter, and sportier, and as it progressed, increasingly distinct from other Pontiac models. Soon, the segment would become associated with aero packages, specifically fastbacks, or at least something intended to gain some sort of racing advantage. Cars like AMC's Marlin, which would exist as both a mid-size and a full-size, but not at the same time. And Dodge's Charger, a car that made an attempt to make the mid-sized Coronet have more of a track advantage. Although by 1968, it was more focused on muscle car sales than racing advantages. And in 1969, Pontiac's Grand Prix also transitioned to a midsize, but not as a sporty fastback that might compete with its own GTO, but a more formal-looking, better-equipped version of the Le Mans, along the lines of a more affordable personal luxury coupe. Starting at $3,800, still significantly cheaper than even a Ford Thunderbird's $4,800 starting price, and much less than the Eldorado's $6,700 price. The following year, Chevrolet got its own version of the Grand Prix as the Monte Carlo, and the segment took off. Its primary competition was the Dodge Charger, which had a completely different image. So naturally, it started gaining features inside and out, such as landau tops and opera windows. Ford's first response was to enlarge and start adding features to the Mustang-based Cougar. Then, GM updated the styling of the Grand Prix and Monte Carlo for 1973, and Buick and Oldsmobile got their own versions as the Regal and Cutlass Supreme, although the Regal and Cutlass looked more like their more mundane Buick and Oldsmobile mid-sized counterparts, which were already considered upmarket. And Oldsmobile had been offering a formal roofline version of the Cutlass as the Cutlass Supreme for a few years. Also, the Cutlass Supreme still counted under the umbrella of overall Cutlass sales, making it look like a more dominant offering than it actually was, while less expensive GM intermediates were offered to gain an aerodynamic advantage in NASCAR in the form of the Chevy Malibu Laguna and the Pontiac Grand Am. Ford entered the segment in earnest in 1974 with a new mid-sized Mercury Cougar. Styling made it look like an evolution of the previous Cougar, while the bigger dimensions made it more competitive in the class. And the Ford division got its own version as the Torino Elite, noting its connection to the Torino while elevating its status, at least in theory. Also for 1974, the AMC Matador Coupe no longer shared styling with the Matador sedan, but instead of following the formal trend of the period, it was styled for an aerodynamic advantage. But in spite of its controversial styling and NASCAR advantage, it too succumbed to the trends of the period before being discontinued. While the Charger gave up any NASCAR-oriented styling in 1975 and all but copied the GM cars, while it was determined that Plymouth wouldn't have enough status for the segment. So instead Chrysler got a version as the Cordoba. With all this new competition, GM responded with updated styling for 1976 with square headlights on the Monte Carlo, Grand Prix, Cutlass Supreme, and Regal. The Cougar would then get new styling with square headlights, but as all new mid-sized Mercuries were now Cougars, only the XR7 remained in the segment, and the restyled Ford would get hidden headlights and take on the Thunderbird name, hopefully leaving the bigger, more expensive segment it left to the Lincoln Mark V. Once again, the Dodge and Chrysler would follow GM's lead with square headlights, but with the change, the Dodge would be renamed Magnum. So naturally, it would be the same year that GM downsized, once again catching the competition off guard and taking control of the segment. Although the cars tried to keep the same general look, for most of them, something was lost in translation. In response, Ford moved to Fox-bodied cars for 1980, and the Thunderbird retained its hidden headlights. The Chrysler Cordoba would also be downsized in 1980, and the Dodge version would be renamed yet again, this time to Murata. GM updated their styling in the early 80s with better proportions and performance options, such as Buick's Turbo V6 Grand National. But Ford took control of the segment and NASCAR in 1983 with the new Aero Thunderbird and Cougar, once again distinct from the other mid-sized Fords, at least in styling. Buick and Oldsmobile already had decent aerodynamics, but the Monte Carlo and Grand Prix got aero packages as the Super Sport and 2+2. By this point, Chrysler had moved to front-wheel drive turbocharged four-cylinder cars and took a stylistic leap forward with the Chrysler Laser and Dodge Daytona in 1984, styling that really didn't fit Chrysler's image, so the car was restyled for 1987 and renamed the LeBaron GTC, a car that would take control of the revived convertible market. GM would give up their muscle car versions for smaller front-wheel drive cars in 1988 that would soon get four-door versions to replace their existing mid-size sedans. The Grand Prix, Cutlass Supreme, and Regal names would carry over, but the Monte Carlo name would be replaced by Lumina. Ford still owned the class, so the redesigned Thunderbird and Mercury Cougar moved back up market instead of following the down market trend. Chevrolet revived the Monte Carlo name in 1995 for the two-door versions of the Lumina, and at the same time, Chrysler replaced the LeBaron GTC and the Dodge Daytona with a coupe version of the Mitsubishi Galant as the Chrysler Sebring SLX and the Dodge Avenger. Unfortunately, the segment was quickly becoming little more than coupe versions of existing sedans, which is about all it ever was amongst imports. Toyota offered a Camry-based coupe as the Solara from 1999 to 2008. Mazda had a special coupe version of the 626 as the MX-6, but supposedly that was more of a competitor for the Toyota Celica. But was it? The Germans have offered special coupe versions of their mid-size cars at various times, such as BMW's 6 Series of 1976 to 1989, although that was probably closer to a 7 Series than a 5 Series, while the Mercedes CLK of 1997 to 2008 fit below the bigger CL. What about the segment today? Buick still makes a Regal, but hasn't made a coupe version since 1996. The last Cutlass Supreme was in 1997, and it never saw a two-door replacement. The Thunderbird and Cougar would also be discontinued in 1977, and although the names would return, they wouldn't be in the same segment. The Grand Prix ran until 2008, but the last coupe version was in 2003, and the Monte Carlo would carry on through 2007. BMW revived the 6 Series for 2003, and it was joined by a 4-door Grand Coupe in 2011, but both have been gone since 2018. Toyota hasn't had a mid-size coupe since the Solara. Nissan killed off the 2-door Altima around 2014, and Honda the 2-door Accord in 2017. Cadillac offered the CTS Coupe from 2011 to 2014, but maybe that was a spiritual successor to the Eldorado. What about the 6-inch shorter ATS Coupe of 2013 to 2019? In short, the segment is gone today. Why are they gone? Because style is no longer a marketable aspect of a car? Because modern generic sedans have all the streamlining needed to make a good race car? Because budget versions of reasonably sized cars are no longer offered, making a luxury version the regular version? Because manufacturers are happy to put all their eggs in the SUV basket? Perhaps all of the above. Today, the trend is to look at most of these cars as personal coupes, but that would suggest the Monte Carlo was a competitor to the Eldorado. And if the Thunderbird didn't change segments in 1977, why would its price drop from nearly $8,000 to roughly $5,000 during a period of high inflation and rapid price hikes, where regular downsizing didn't see any significant drop in prices at all? Does taking luxury out of the phrase personal luxury coupe make the difference? Maybe, but the big selling point of these cars in their heyday was that they were upmarket. Is a Touring Coupe just an affordable personal coupe, or a glorified mid-size coupe? Or could it be both? Is the segment really dead? Where does the Audi A5 fit in? Most likely, like every other modern coupe, under the catch-all of GT. What are your thoughts? As always, thanks for watching. Don't forget to comment below and like and subscribe.